such a serious issue. And most people have no clue how serious it is. They've heard the 6.1 million, and that shocks people. But, Daryl, you talked about the 18 million. You want to tell people again today why that 18 million number is so important?
Oh, yeah, Barbara. When we talk about the restoration panel and the restoration of rights, voting rights for people that have been previously improvised by the court system, their voting rights, we're really talking about some 18 million people that have been impacted and don't know that they have the right to vote. We've gotten as a society and as a country so indoctrinated into believing that if you have a felony conviction that you've lost forever your right to vote. And so there are 18 million people that just think they don't have the right to vote when, in fact, they do. And, there's no information that's being easily made available to them to inform them that their right to vote is ripe, and they can vote if they went on and registered to vote. So it's really important that there be as equally as deep a campaign to educate people about their right to vote being returned as it is about the loss of that right to vote when a person is incarcerated. And that 18 million people, folks, that would represent somewhere between 3 and 6% of the electorate in an election and can swing an election any kind of way. So it's really important that, that folks understand the impact of those that have been felony disenfranchised because of a system that was based on racism that came out of post-slavery, Barbara.
Yes, and I'm so happy to hear that Mark Thompson has joined us because he's worked on these issues so much. Mark Thompson, welcome to Igniting Change again. Thank you for all of your leadership. We've been talking and just praising the Selma Jubilee, what it was like to be there throughout the whole of the Jubilee. Mark, you're a member of the board of the Selma Jubilee. You helped to put all this together. What were your thoughts about this year's Jubilee? And why should people start planning now for the upcoming 60th Selma Jubilee in 2025?
Well, first of all, Dr. Arnwine, it's always a pleasure to be with you and the great work you're doing on Igniting Change and the great work you're doing with the Transformative Justice Coalition. And you've always been on the front line, especially when it comes to voting rights and even helping some of our families like the Arbery family. I thought the Jubilee was another successful year. The beautiful thing about the Jubilee is that it's always been pretty organic in terms of people coming. You never really have to do a great deal of mobilization because many people know about the sacredness of that space, and they come. And, you and I go years back. I remember a lot of our heroes and sheroes have passed on. But even as recently as 10 or 15 years ago, it was a who's who of civil rights icons at Jubilee. And I remember years when Mamie Till Mobley would come. I remember when the entire Kennedy family would come, when the entire Lyndon Baines Johnson family. And why was that? Selma was sacred. Everybody came to Selma. That was the one space where Dr. King called everyone, and everyone come. Even Malcolm X came to Selma. And there are many of us who believe it was that visit is what got the wheels more expeditiously in motion to take him out, because the signal was clear that if Malcolm came and spoke at Selma on February 6, 1965, invited by John Lewis and SNCC, and then by February 21st, he was taken from us. And I think it was clear Malcolm had already been expelled from the nation, and I think there was a strong likelihood that if Malcolm had lived, he wanted to be in the movement. He wanted to march. I think if Malcolm had lived, the march from Selma to Montgomery might have been his first march. And that could not happen. Can you imagine Martin Luther King and Malcolm X marching together from Selma to Montgomery? And J. Edgar Hoover, would not have allowed that to happen. So I say all that to say Selma is the Calvary of democracy. There was no democracy in this country before Selma because we didn't have the right to vote. And so people should understand that. And as a minister, I always have to think of things from a spiritual and theological perspective. Jesus was crucified for the sins of the whole world, but John Lewis and Amelia Boynton and Cheyenne Webb and others who were there, and Joanne Bland, those who were there on that bridge on Bloody Sunday were crucified for the sins of America. And the greatest sin of all was denying the formerly enslaved people the right to vote as the 14th and 15th Amendments require. Now, we just learned, attorney, obviously, and the world has learned, it's interesting how this Supreme Court will only enforce constitutional amendments when it comes to us through an act of Congress. But notice they've never asked for an act of Congress to enforce the Second Amendment. Has anybody else noticed that?
Never.
And I'm the only one that's noticed that.
And so, Mark, one thing people don't know about Malcolm X, and the reason why Mark said what he said, folks, is that in COINTELPRO, when those documents were released, and COINTELPRO, for those of you who don't know, was a program that the FBI ran for decades to destroy black leaders like Marcus Garvey was probably one of their first targets, not really their first one because Callie House was before Garvey, and then they did Garvey right after Callie House, and we found documents that have been released to the public that are redacted that talks about how they cannot allow a black leader to emerge during the civil rights movement. And it was fascinating because if you read some of Malcolm's statements, one of the things that Malcolm X said was that he wanted to be a civil rights lawyer.
That's right.
Had his life been different, that's what he would have been, was a civil rights lawyer. Don't forget, folks, that there's, power in fighting for justice at every level. So, Mark, we got another question for you.
Yes,
one of the highlights of the Selma Jubilee has been that everybody in the world, there are all these articles about the speech that was given by Vice President Kamala Harris. Tell people, why was that speech important, and what does it mean?
Well, first of all, what people may not know is that late last week there was a meeting with several ministers and the vice president. I could not be there, but I sent a list. I sent some notes. And I'll be transparent with you. In some of my notes, what I said was that the Biden administration really needs to understand history and see how it's careening toward the LBJ administration of 1968 and the Carter administration of 1980. Two administrations that were besieged by conflicts in the world and lost their elections because of LBJ didn't even try to get reelected. He dropped out. Now, principally, those of us in the civil rights struggle, all of us, whether we're in ministry or we're civil rights attorneys like you and activists, I've said to people, if you don't know where to fall on this issue of Gaza, then just defer to Dr. King. Do what he would have done. And we know what he would have done. And because he did what he did in 1968, speaking out against the Vietnam War, LBJ had to drop out of the race. And so I sent a message saying, if y'all don't want to be LBJ or if you don't want to be Jimmy Carter, and granted now, let me just be fair, the war could have ended in 1968. But now we know Richard Nixon went in and sabotaged the Paris Peace Accords. Carter could have been reelected, but now we know Ronald Reagan sent H.W. and William Casey to meet with the Ayatollah in Paris in the summer of 1980 and asked him to keep the hostages until so that Carter could get to be elected. And folks, y'all don't believe that. Just go back and look at the inauguration. As soon as he takes his hand off that Bible, he said the hostages were now free. So we know these things. What I said in my notes to that meeting was that this is the same situation, and Netanyahu has made it clear because of his alliance with Putin and Trump, he doesn't mind costing Biden because his boy Trump will be back in office. Netanyahu in Israel, but even by the Jews in Israel, the citizenry is considered the Trump of Israel. So for the vice president to make the strong statement she made shows, because let's be honest, y'all, presidents and vice presidents don't always agree on everything. And I think we got a clear indication that Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, would like to see a change in the administration's direction when it comes to Gaza. Some people say, well, why was she saying at the bridge? Listen, folks, for years, it's been almost impossible, I should say, to draw a delineation between the struggle of the Palestinian people and the struggle of African Americans, and especially when it comes to Israel. And folks may not want to believe this or remember it, but remember, and you know this well, Barbara, the Israeli regime supported the South African apartheid regime for decades. In fact, I don't think there are any more resolutions. I don't think there are more resolutions condemning Israel for an issue more so than their support of the apartheid regime and them helping the apartheid regime build a nuclear weapon. So we are in solidarity, and we have to be. That's our shared experience. And so for the vice president to do that in that space, at Selma, at a sacred space like that where it was so critical to our democracy, was a powerful message. And I hope that the rest of the administration gets it before it's too late.
Thank you for sharing that. And quickly, because we're almost out of time, quickly,
yes,
can you tell people why they better show up for the 60th anniversary?
What Mecca is to the Muslim faith, what Bethlehem is to the Christian faith, Selma is to our civil rights struggle, our culture, our legacy as a people. No Selma, you don't have a Barack Obama. You don't have a Kamala Harris. In fact, you don't even have Jimmy Carter would have never been elected from Georgia if not from Selma. Bill Clinton from Arkansas. None of the things we have, the rights we've achieved for our people, for women, for all people of color, rights that are under assault now. Selma is the place where all of that began. And that's probably the place where, in all the stops along the movement, Montgomery, Birmingham, Jackson, Mississippi, the greatest casualties were in Selma. That was how threatening Selma was. And so, folks, make your way there. There is no experience like standing on that bridge and understanding what it means for a collective. Jesus was an individual on the cross with two other people, but this was a whole collective of people willing to shed blood and risk their lives for the collective freedom of us all. And there is nothing more powerful than that. Nothing more powerful than that. So please, folks, make your plans early. Don't just meet us in Selma next March. Beat us there.
All right now, and Daryl, take us home. And thanks to you, Mark, and to all our guests. Take us home. I didn't
know Daryl was there. Hey, Daryl, how you doing, brother?
Doing good, Reverend. And congratulations on a successful Selma Jubilee. Thanks to our guests, Reverend Mark Thompson, Andreas Cubillos, and Edward Ward. Folks, you've got the call. You've heard the clarion call. You've heard the horn. Be certain to be in the place for the 60th anniversary in Selma, Alabama next year. And if you are in one of the Super Tuesday states that are voting today, get off the sidewalks, get into the streets, make your way to a ballot box, and make that vote count. Until next Tuesday, noon Eastern Standard Time, peace, everybody.
Peace.
The preceding program was paid for by Barbara Arnwine.
This is Kathy Hughes with Radio 1, encouraging you to use a mixture of caution and compassion to assure safety during this COVID-19 outbreak. Be sure to take all the necessary precautions, including washing your hands for at least half a minute. Avoid unnecessary close contact with others. Stop touching your face, eyes, or mouth without first sanitizing your hands. And if you do not feel well, please stay home.
Brought to you by 1450 WOL and Urban One.
2024 is here, and we are officially in primary season. Get registered in your state and help make a difference. Remember, you cannot vote unless you have registered. If you need to find more information about how, when, and where to vote, please visit onevote2024.com. Urban One wants to thank you for registering to vote and to remind you about your state primary in Maryland on May 14th. Urban One is committed to ensuring voters of the information they need to participate in every election. Log on to onevote2024.com.
WOL, Washington, D.C. W240.